you, Megan. It's so wonderful to see all of you at this event, which is the premier event of our 5-day virtual Morehead-Cain Alumni Mini Forum. We have one event each day from now until Friday, and I hope you'll join us for as many of them as you can. For me, this is a particularly special week and a special session. I see it in some ways as the conclusion of my onboarding to Morehead-Cain. I crossed 100 days at the foundation last week. And now today I get this rich overview and look back of a more than 75-year history. Actually, the foundation's establishment was 76 years ago this coming Sunday, November 21st, 1945. And so we look forward to hearing stories from 3 alumni to launch an evening of storytelling by all of you. And before we do, I'll hand the mic to Megan, who will provide an overview of the history of the foundation and the program. Megan, as the ranking member of our staff, back to you.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. And what an honor it is to be in a position to talk about the history of this amazing program and this incredible organization. But I have to admit that putting together a brief history of the 75 years of the foundation is one of the more challenging tasks I have undertaken in recent memory, because there's just so much rich history and so many interesting characters in our past that it was super hard to pick and choose. But I've tried to have it both ways. What I have done, as you'll see from the PowerPoint slideshow that I'm about to go through, I am going to be sharing only the most high-level information about the program. And what I'm going to do afterwards, because you're going to see that there is a lot of detail in the slides that I am not saying. And so for those of you who are history nerds like me and want to get into that detail, I'm going to share a PDF of the slideshow after the presentation is over so that you can delve in. And feel free to call me if any of it looks particularly interesting, because I love to talk about foundation history and could talk about it all day long. So with that, I will get started on the presentation. And as we all know, any organization or experience or program is really made by the people involved. And so this evening, I'm going to go through, much too quickly, a series of slides about all the folks who have been a part of this program. And I would like to start with one of the most confusing pieces of information that we have to share with new staff members, particularly those who are new to North Carolina, because we have to explain to them that Morehead City, North Carolina, and the Morehead Planetarium are named after 2 different John Motley Moreheads. And Morehead City is named for the first and original John Motley Morehead, who was the grandfather of our John Motley Morehead, and he was governor of the state of North Carolina twice. His grandson, our benefactor, was also a generous benefactor to the university in other ways. He, of course, gave the planetarium, he gave the bell tower, and he gave our foundation and our scholarship program. He was John Motley Morehead III, but there was no John Motley Morehead Jr. There was a John Motley Morehead II, who was a first cousin of our John Motley Morehead III. So I'm sure family gatherings with John Motley Morehead I and the 2 cousins must have been a lot of fun to be at, to try to keep everybody straight. This John Motley Morehead II was also the father of a very important figure in the history of our program, John Lindsay Morehead II. Now, John Lindsay was a younger cousin and a great friend to John Motley Morehead III, our benefactor. It was John Lindsay's idea to leave a legacy, for Uncle Mott to leave a legacy of human lives and of human endeavor by creating a scholarship program based on the Rhodes Scholarship that was meant to attract to UNC the best and brightest leaders who would make their mark at the university, on the state and on the nation, and really eventually on the world. So a very important figure in our program. John Lindsay was a special person, and his legacy will come up again and again. Off I go now into a really quick overview of people who are incredibly important. And I hope some of you will tell stories about these folks when it's your turn to tell stories, because they're far more important than I'm able to give them time for. Coach Bob Fetzer was the first director of the program, a beloved gentleman. Another beloved human being, Roy Armstrong, I've heard many stories about him from all of you over the years, was the second director of the program, the first executive director of the program. Mrs. Perry, what can I say? I got to work with Mrs. Perry for a couple of years before she retired, and she is a national treasure, really. I hope a story or two will come up about her later. Mevin Pritchett was the first alumnus of the program to join the staff. He was director of the program for many years and left to help start the Coca-Cola Scholars Program in Atlanta. Hugh Chatham was a longtime chair of our board and the father of another chair of our board who will come up a little bit later, Lucy Chatham. Alan Dixon served as the chair of our board longer than anyone else, and can't say enough good things about Alan Dixon, and I hope you will come back and read all the detail on this slide when you can. Frank Haynes, another beloved gentleman. I guess everyone's beloved. I'll stop saying beloved. They're wonderful. They're all wonderful. But the Haynes Art Center on UNC campus is named for Frank Haynes, and he also started the Thomas Wolfe Scholarship, which is a scholarship like the Morehead, but for writers. Bob Cluett, a longtime trustee who started the Canadian program and whose daughter is currently a trustee on the board. Jean Motley Morehead Larkin went by Motley. She was the first woman to serve on the board, and her son, Peter Larkin, is on the board at present. There's Lucy Chatham, who was the first woman to serve as chair of the board, and she is the granddaughter of John Lindsay Morehead II and the daughter of Hugh Chatham, a former chair. Now, when Mrs. Cain gave the Cain grant in 2007, her daughter, Peggy, and her son, Jim, became members of the board and served for several years. So they were on the board for a while. And Russell Robinson was our general counsel, but really everyone just considered him, even though he wasn't a voting trustee, he was really the sixth trustee on the trustee board and an amazing human being. Jimmy Wright was the second alum to join the staff and was assistant director and left to start or help start the Jefferson Scholars Program, and he is still president of that program today. We all know Chuck, who was the third alum to join the staff and retired after 37 years. Hard to believe after all that time. And you can see some names of other alums who have worked on the staff over the years here below. Mrs. Cain, of course, gave the Cain grant in 2007. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Gordon Cain is her husband, who had passed away previously, but in whose memory she gave that award to us. The first alum to become a trustee it happened in 2001, and it was Tim Burnett. And since that time, I'm very pleased to say we have added many alums. David Wright became the first to become chair of the board. And at this time, I do have to say that the majority of our trustees are actually alumni now rather than family members. It's the reverse of, well, I mean, at first it was only family members. So the makeup of the board now is 6 alumni, 2 family members, and 1 non-alum, non-family member. And of course, we have a new face on the block, Chris Bradford, our new president, who you have all met, I hope, during his meetups with your decades. We welcomed Chris to the staff this summer. So now to sort of get more into the dates and times and that sort of thing very quickly. In the beginning, on November 21st, 1945, Uncle Mott signed the indenture and created the foundation. And he tasked it with 2 jobs. One was to build the planetarium building, and you can see it under construction here in this picture. And he gave that to the university as a gift. And once that was all done, he was able to start his scholarship program, John Lindsay Morehead's great idea. The program, of course, at the beginning had a very complex selection process that many of you went through across the state of North Carolina. very admirable task, I think, putting that together. Early on, only schools in North Carolina could nominate, but then over the years, slowly but surely, out-of-state schools were added to the point that now we actually have 700 or so out-of-state schools and many schools around the world as well. So the program has grown quite a bit. The first undergraduate class was the class of 1957, an illustrious group, I must say, lots of really interesting people, including Mevin Pritchett, who was the director of the program for many years. A bit about the scholar experience. At the beginning, as you all know, it was a pretty homogenous group, all male, all Caucasian, and not much of a cohort, really. Very much individuals who came to the university and were leaders on their own. They did not get together a lot. The fall banquet, I think, would be the only time during the year when they would see each other. That has changed quite a bit. And over the years, we have grown and become much more diverse, as I'm sure you all know. And you can see first the dates here for the first African-American scholar was in 1968, our first Brit in 69, women came in 1975, Canadians in 85, and then other international students were started being selected in 2010. And I think that was the year that we had our first student from ALA, which is Chris's school. So that's kind of a fun tie-in there. In 1974, a huge sea change for the program, the summer enrichment program. As you can see here, very few scholars at the beginning. Not all scholars participated right away. It was an experiment. So 10 rising, entering freshmen and 10 rising sophomores did the typical sort of outward bound and then public safety, which stayed in place for years, as you all know. As a matter of fact, now, one of the things that is definitely still in place is the outdoor leadership summer. It has been the through line for us. It's such a great way to start a scholar's experience at Carolina. So that is still there. Public safety was replaced by public service, which has now been replaced by civic collaboration, which is an incredibly enriching program that scholars do as groups together across the country. Global perspective is sort of the old travel study with a little bit more enrichment to it. And professional experience is what we used to call private enterprise. So you can see the structure is pretty much the same. In 1992, we started asking scholars to write a renewal letter every summer, and they began to meet with someone on the staff as an advisor every year. And that has now become quite a professional program. We have 3 professional advisors who are on the staff to meet with scholars. A few additional experiences that have been added over the years, the Discovery Fund, I think you've all heard about. It was renamed for Chuck when he retired, so it's now the Lovelace Fund for Discovery. The Study Abroad Fund supports scholars studying abroad either for a semester, a summer, a Maymester, whatever they might want to choose. And then we do have an International Gap Year Fund where scholars can take a gap year before they come to Carolina. Over the years, alums have been engaged from the very, very beginning and really early on. I mean, in 62, when you think the first class was 1957, and already in 62 and 66, we were having folks on selection committees. Alumni have been sponsors of internships since the very beginning as well. And about half of our internships are sponsored by alums at this point. They have spoken at finals weekend over the years. That has been a very enriching part of alumni service to the program. And then in 2008, we began having alumni read applications and help us in the selection process, which now is a video interview assessment rather than an application read. And then in 2017, we did a really great deep dive study that Mike Daimler made possible through a pro bono team of his from BCG, and learned a lot about what it is that you all really want us to be doing. And we immediately launched into doing them all, and then COVID hit. So we'll be back with some of the ideas that we couldn't do in person. But for now, thank you for being mentors. Thank you for attending all of our events, and we appreciate that. The forum, what I've done here is I've done a slide on each forum, and I'm going to just whip through those because those of you who are interested can come back and have a peek to see what it was all about. But the Alumni Forum has just been an incredible bonding, wonderful opportunity for all of us. And it was started, of course, in 1997. Brad Ives had the idea and put together the first team of volunteers and did the whole thing with no help from the staff. After that, we started joining in and helping, and have been a big part of it since then. So you can see here that there is a theme, and we list the co-chairs, and we list locations and dinner speakers and cool new ideas and that sort of thing for each of the forums. So if you are interested in this sort of stuff like I am, you can come back and really enjoy diving in and saying, oh yeah, I remember that speaker from that year. And we are also planning at this point, of course, for 2022, Brian Strong and Mazzocchi Boulamiri are our co-chairs, and things are cooking. So we're very excited about that. A quick run through in honor of our Day of Giving this week. We really are all about development, because we were begun with a gift from an alum of the university. John Motley Morehead, of course, started the foundation with a gift of 300 shares of his carbide stock, and wrote checks to support the program after that. But then when he passed away, he gave his pretty much almost his entire estate to the foundation, and kept the foundation running for many, many years with no need for fundraising. As a matter of fact, when alumni first fundraised together, Barbara Hyde was working in the development office at UNC and thought, alums give to this university in tremendous numbers. I think more than 90% of Morehead-Cain alumni have given to the university at some time in their lives. That is an unbelievable statistic. Barbara thought, why don't we get together as a group and fund something? And so you all funded the first $1 million chair, a professorship at UNC. And those funds have grown to the point where there are now 3 Morehead-Cain alumni professors at UNC. And you will hear one of them speak in the spring as part of our speaker series. So the time that first fundraiser was for that purpose. And then the second fundraiser, the bicentennial, was the first time alums decided to give some of the funds toward the support of our program, because we were in a situation where scholar numbers had dropped so low. So that was the first time that had happened. Another campaign continued along those lines, more professorships, more scholarships, all those kinds of things. And we are currently in a campaign that has been tremendously successful, as you all know. Started out with a goal of 25 million in gifts and pledges and 25 million in planned gifts, and reached that goal before the 2018 deadline. So we created a new goal of 75 million in the foundation's 75th year to support 75 scholars. And you reached that goal ahead of time too. So congratulations, you all are amazing. In 2004, the Morehead-Cain Scholarship Fund was created, and it's a 501c3. So that makes it possible for gifts to the foundation to be tax deductible and to count as a gift to UNC. So it's kind of a cool combination of ways that support can be put to use. The Cain Grant is a special story, as you all know. Mrs. Cain took a look at what we do and thought, wow, that I think I'd like to be a part of that. So she doubled the endowment of our foundation, and the trustees chose at that time to rename the foundation in honor of the magnitude of that gift. And over the years, right after that, in the months right after that, we dreamed big, and we came up with many cool things that we could do based on that. The scholar advising, there were some ideas. There were changes to alumni engagement, to the selection process, to communications, and we added 4 new staff positions at that point. It also came at a convenient time because it was 2007, and as we all know, the economic downturn happened the next year or so, and she really kept the foundation alive, and we're here today with great gratitude. I'm going to wrap up with a slide about what hasn't changed over the years. There are just some awesome traditions here at the foundation. Scholars actually still receive paper checks on check day, and cookies, of course. And we've always had the senior dinner in the state dining room. They're just some wonderful some wonderful parts of our program that we haven't changed and which we think probably won't change much over the years. So, so that was my breakneck pace through 75 years. I hope that I didn't talk too fast for all of you, but I really just wanted to get in as much as I could. And as I said, I'm going to share the PDF of the slideshows so that all of you will have an opportunity to dive in and call me up and talk about those things later. What we're going to do now, a really, really fun part of our program, is we'll have our 3 alumni who have been designated to talk about their different eras of the program: Tim Burnett, Rachel Pfeifer, and Namal Huck. And we will start with Tim Burnett, who is class of 1962. And as you saw from the slides, he was the first alum to become a trustee of the program. Tim, we appreciate you being here and telling your story.
Thank you, Megan. You have taken every one of my points right out of my mouth, and that's beautiful because you'd given me 5 minutes and you have covered the history of the program from the beginning. Great job. And having that on a PDF file is something everyone should watch. Class of 62, let me tell you, back when, by the way, we just had a big birthday in this country. The United States Marine Corps celebrated its 246th year. And I'm reminded of the story when they started. A couple of Navy officers came to in front of the Tun Tavern in Philadelphia, set up a little table and said, anybody who come up and ask, you sign and join this Marine Corps, and we'll give you a chit to go inside the tavern and get a big glass of ale. So he signed up number 1, he went in. He signed up number 2, he went in. Number 3 came up, gave him the same pitch. He signed up, went inside, and the first 2 were sitting at a table talking about the old Corps. And I feel like that's what I'm getting ready to do. I'm going to talk about the old program. Here's what the takeaway is. In the class of graduating in 58, the first, 57, there were 6 scholars. In 58, there were 8. In 59, there were 18. And in 60, 23. And by the time I got here, there were 27. So they were doubling and really blowing this program out. But that was it. The program was you went in the fall and Miss Perry gave you a check and told you to do well. And that's the last you saw of her until the next semester. And if you got in there and she had a check for you, it meant you were doing okay. And that's what the program consisted of, literally. We didn't know each other on the campus. Once a year in the fall, there was a banquet for all the scholars. It didn't take long. There wasn't a lot of them. You didn't know them. You walked around campus, you didn't know who they were. There was no sweatshirt on. And that was the intent of the program, is go into the campus, don't identify with the program, go into the campus and do whatever you can do to fulfill what we hope will be an improvement in the campus. You'll be shocked to hear there were no summer experiences. And scholars would say to me years later, what did you do your second summer? And I would say, I suckered tobacco on a farm in Guilford County. And that's the point. There was no summer program. There was no Outward Bound or Knowles. There was no Discovery Fund. I heard some talk when I was a trustee about a concierge service for the freshmen, but the trustees never voted for that. It's one of the few bells and whistles they didn't love. So when you graduated from here, other than getting that very fine diploma and having a little better idea of who your fellow scholars were, but not a great one, because you really didn't see them around campus. You might see someone like Richard Vinrud, who was a star on the basketball team, but you just didn't know who they were, and that was the intent. And so the program did what the trustees, and particularly John Lindsay, had in mind, but there was no there was no corpus, or there was no yoke that had those scholars all working together. And if you were really watching what Megan said, well, they did this and they did that, you know, a Salvation Army band doesn't have as many bells and whistles and drums as this program has. But the beauty of it is it's always been in transition and thoughtful, not just can we add another whistle. And Tom Morris would have told us in any of our forums that that wouldn't lead to anything useful. And so the program has, on the one hand, been willing to change with time on multiple fronts, and yet on the other hand, always stay relevant for what they had in mind. I did leave out one thing. A big change in the program was when they began to admit females, which they couldn't do until Chapel Hill admitted females as freshmen. And so that was a huge difference in the nature of the program. I think it raised the IQ and the academic achievement of the program considerably, but it didn't change what the program was about. And the women that have come into the program have done every bit as much to pull this wagon as the men ever were able to do. Megan, I don't know if that's my 5 minutes, but tack that on to all the good things you told us. And I can just say the program was bare bones the whole time I was here, and that wasn't bad. You had to go pull your own wagon, if you will. Now there are lots of wagons out there for you to choose among. And I've been delighted while a student here, as well as connected to the program through all the years, to see it progress. And it's been one of the wonders of the world to see, at least on the Chapel Hill world, to see what it's done and what it's done for the university. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Tim. Perfect way to open up the storytelling. Next, we are going to call on Rachel Mazyck, Pfeifer, class of 2002, who is a current trustee of the foundation. Rachel, thanks for being an important part of the program this evening.
I'm so glad to be here. And Tim, I could listen to you chat all day about this. I have so many questions now, so I have to catch you later to ask them.
Rachel, let me interrupt. I did say one thing I wanted to say if I were going to be given a full introduction of you. When you came in the program, and now as a trustee, the average age of the trustee board, with my going off the board and you're coming on, it dropped by at least a decade. And I know doggone well the IQ of the board went up substantially. Sorry for the interruption.
I'm not so sure about that, but
I am.
No, I'm just grateful to be considered in that same group. You know, so coming to Carolina in the the late 90s, 1999 was when I set foot on campus, was really marked by pretty significant technology shift. And so just, I had to do some crowdsourcing with some fellow scholars just to make sure my memory of what we actually did was correct. And so I want to thank Kim Roberson and Dana Ledyard and Katie Nelson and Julie Wary for joining me on this trip down memory lane. But one of the things that we remembered really clearly is we were the first year of the laptop initiative, and the university had decided to do all these different things related to freshmen when we came. And so our Morehead experience at that time was kind of complemented by the university deciding that freshman year was incredibly important. And so they kind of threw all these different things at us for us to participate in. Now, one of the things where I think we might have had a slight advantage is while Facebook did not exist yet, when we were scholars, we did have books with faces in them. And so occasionally you might pass someone on campus, and while they didn't have a sweatshirt, they definitely, you could go back to your room and look and say, I think I recognize that face, and I think that person may be a Morehead, which was a very, I guess it was progress in being able to identify each other. We did have our outward bound summer or Knowles summer at the time. And I know that some of us got grouped together and were able to have similar experiences, certainly a lot of experiences to share. I remember we all kind of came back and had a picnic, maybe in the Arboretum or somewhere in the grounds, where we all kind of gathered and shared some stories about the hardships we'd faced and how we made it through. And now we knew we could do anything because we made it through that summer. In terms of keeping in touch with each other, I'm really excited to hear Namel speak, because we were at the very beginning. For some of us, it was the first time we had internet. I think for most of us, it was certainly the first time we had laptops. I remember my father buying me a lock to, take my laptop on campus and I could lock it up. And after graduation, he kind of pulled the lock from the box, like intact, just the way he bought it. And he said, "You never used it?" I said, "Oh, well, I never took it anywhere. You didn't actually bring your laptop places. You just placed it just like the desktop you might have had, right? And you left it in one place for however many years." We also were at the very beginning of AOL Instant Messenger, which, as funny as it seems now, was actually a really effective way of our keeping in touch with each other, in addition to the landlines that we used and paid long distance bills for. That was my first bill paying experience, was writing checks for 78 cents for calls to Maryland, right? That I remember being late, like one day late once, and running to, I don't know, the bursar, I guess, or register, whatever it was, and kind of running and saying, "I'm so sorry, I'm so late. Like, I hope there's not interest on this," and they said, "Well, how much do you owe?" And I was like, "It's 83 cents. They said, "Please just give us the money. We're not charging you additional interest for being a day late." But we did use AOL Instant Messenger to share different things with each other, as long as you were sitting at your desk in your room. I remember putting my away message for AOL to let people know where I would be during the day on campus, as if anybody was really looking for me. But you could see, like, my schedule, and I was going to be at the pit between this time and this time, and in the library from this time to this time, because once I left my room, there was really no chance you were going to find me unless you bumped into me by accident. One of the other things that was pretty striking for our class and our experience was 9/11. And it really was just, I think obviously all of us can kind of remember where we were and what that was like, but we talked, one of our classmates talked about studying abroad during that time and coming back to a country that was so very different than the one she had left, in terms of the fear and the security measures, and just generally what it took to get in and out of the airport, right? It used to be that your parents could actually walk you down to the gate if they were so inclined, and that certainly ended. So that was something that, I think touched all of us in a variety of different ways, but certainly being on campus at that time and having, the opportunities to travel in ways that many of our other Carolina classmates didn't, but yet still with the foundation trying to keep us safe, right? And trying to help us navigate what was new for everyone, was something that was noted and just part of our memory, our collective memory of that time. I'll end on a slightly lighter note, which is about basketball tickets. So this is not Morehead specific, but we did in kind of our collective recollection note that in order to get basketball tickets, you had to, and I'm hoping I'm getting this right, but you had to sign up in person. You had to get a number, a little wristband, and then you had to look in the Daily Tar Heel for a number to see where you would be in line. And then early on Saturday morning, you had to line up in order of your number in order to actually get, hope that you were in line to get tickets. And for all the students now who, I don't know how it's done, but I'm sure it doesn't involve getting in line and looking in the DTH for a number that aligns with your wristband. The internet has been an amazing thing. But, I think that we have, as a generation, kind of found increasing camaraderie over the years as we have access to internet more, as we have cell phones, and different things. But we were certainly in the in-between class where we were starting to get that technology, but hadn't quite figured out how we could use it yet. Thanks, Megan.
Rachel, fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay, so yes, as Rachel and Tim both mentioned, next up is Namel Huck, class of 2008, who, among many other contributions to the program, led our 2014 brand repositioning and was our finals weekend keynote speaker that year. Namel.
Thank you, Megan. Thanks everyone for joining. I'm really encouraged by Rachel's comments on sort of the exponential rate of advancement, because it seems like the pacing of these recollections goes back to a long, slow build phase, and then a rapid increase in technology and access and information that I think has completely transformed the world and certainly transformed my educational experience. I entered Carolina in 2004, and due to the financial conditions of the time, we were one of the smallest class sizes of that era. It was a group of just 40 scholars, which is massive compared to Tim's cohort, but I think indicative of how the world was creeping into our little North Carolina town and changing the lives of the people who live there in a really profound way. And I don't think any of us were thinking about the markets or the sort of the macro financial conditions that led to that contraction. But it was defining for us because, while it was a period of austerity, I didn't really know it because of the largesse of the foundation. It was beyond anything I'd ever experienced. And I was really sort of distracted by the continuation and acceleration of that digital transformation that Rachel described. I think all of us were being conditioned for a kind of systemic change that echoes through all of the changes that I think you all will probably describe, transformational experience in individual life, but the world continuing to change around you and just getting up to speed with all of that. So being a small group, we were pretty tight knit. There were a few of us, and especially among the out-of-staters, we sort of banded together in a way that I think was somewhat unique to our batch of scholars. We had some of the first online Morehead-Cain networks. We were very interconnected through email and social media. We were finding better ways to collaborate with one another and keep communication alive and establish a marketplace of ideas, a place where we could connect with each other when we became alumni. And I think that has been a major shift in a more community-oriented dynamic for the foundation. It's something that we certainly tried to emphasize the idea of and have it be supportive of the kind of growth that we've seen in the foundation and the contributions to the organization and awareness of all of the scholars' activities that we've seen come out of that. So, in my time, things really started to move online. Social media was established. I was a senior in high school when Facebook launched, and my childhood, really straddled that last vestige of the analog to digital life, going from touch-tone telephone to Skype. And passing notes in class to AOL Instant Messenger, which is where I learned how to type really fast so that I could get all my thoughts out to the girls in my class. And we were kind of the first digital natives, right? Figuring out how to navigate the 1.0 version of the world and all its changing technologies while kind of finding our way. So when we won the basketball national championship in 2005, that might have been the first time in Carolina history that a moment like that went viral online. We had our first taste of balancing the online and offline worlds and dealing with things that might have been said about us online or things that people were, sharing and carrying that into real life discussions. taking photographs that I had printed out from a disposable camera on my Knowles course and digitizing them so that they could be shared with people back home and all across the globe, and with trustees and other folks who might not have had access to my flip book or my photo album previously. And then other things like major moments and transformations and growth. We had the shock of losing a scholar. Eve Carson was murdered while we were students, and the experience of seeing a constant 24-hour news cycle surrounding that and consoling, reaching out to each other and consoling each other through text messages was really new. There was a lot of organizing and action that came out of that because of the technology that was available to people. And we saw that there's a legacy and infrastructure and years, now over a decade, of new scholarships and beautiful memory of who she was, because that could be preserved through the images and videos and messages that we were able to have of her at that time. So I think we got pretty good at it, and I think we have a lot of lessons to pass on to the Gen Z and the next gen communities who are starting to learn and interact in the most interconnected era of our lives. So I think it could be good to start running it back to the history now that we reached 2008 when I graduated, because as much collective knowledge as there is that flowed to me and beyond me, there are now lessons, I think, to relate back to those who were here before us. We're seeing a distribution of the responsibility of carrying the foundation's legacy to its direct beneficiaries. These kinds of reorganizations of the Board of Trustees help integrate that collective knowledge and experiences that the scholars have into the operations of the organization. And it really benefits the foundation to see the investment in its scholars play back and pay itself back to its own existence. So I think at no time in my experience as a scholar or alumni I've ever felt so connected with all the scholars from our program. I think it's obvious that everybody here has had some transformational experience, and the university and its program have never stopped transforming themselves. I'll leave you with a quick anecdote. I was in Asheville a couple of weeks ago, and I went to a used bookstore, and they had a book called The First University, which was this heavy tome, and it had all these photos and etchings that go back to UNC's inception. And one of the first images in the book was of the old well. So the oldest well was kind of the pull crank bucket thing that you might imagine from some kind of fairy tale. And it wasn't until 1897 that it was remodeled in its current style, which is based on the Temple of Love from Versailles. So even from the earliest days, we're looking back at antiquity and looking at the past for important lessons in history. So I think it's really wonderfully fitting for us to have this moment, bring it together and connect across our years. So appreciate you asking me to speak today.
Beautiful name. Well, perfect. Yeah, this is a great way to launch the storytelling for everyone on the call. All attendees are welcome to share their stories. I don't see any hands up at present, so if anybody wants to jump in, I see Joe Griffin. Yes. Okay. Unmute. I think you're still on mute, Joe. And Howard, I see you next. Okay, great.
How about now? Can you hear me? Do you hear me now?
I do. I muted myself and then couldn't tell you that I could hear you, but we hear you. We hear you loud and clear.
Okay. I'm class of 64, and I had a time like has been described by the other graduates, not knowing or having a lot of classes with other Moreheads, but we had one event during our undergraduate time that was most notable, and that occurred in November 1963 with the assassination of President John Kennedy. Kennedy had been to campus in, I believe, the fall of '62 and spoke at an overwhelming crowd at Kenan Stadium. And the security basically closed the surrounding highways into Chapel Hill, particularly 54 back toward Raleigh-Durham and west toward Burlington. All of that was shut down for security reasons. And he arrived and left Chapel Hill after a wonderful, wonderful time on campus. But then the assassination occurred on a Friday afternoon, or about noon, I suppose, in Texas. And that day was the only day I did not have a laboratory or an afternoon class. So I was in my dorm room sleeping when the crowd noise outside just broke me and awakened me, and we all ran outside to hear about the shooting in Texas. So that was the most notable event during the 4 years that I can remember.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Joe.
Thank you.
Yeah. Howard Shub. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Howard Shub, but I think I'm sort of a little bit of a dinosaur here. I was a Morehead from 72 to 76, but I was a Morehead fellow. So what you left out a little bit, Megan, in your history is the era of fellows, and I was a fellow in medicine. There were law, I believe, business, I think, was also given a fellowship then. And my story is I was spending winters at Cornell in Ithaca, putting up with snow, and Carolina came to recruit for medical school there. My roommate had a brother who and father who went to Chapel Hill, and we took a spring break visit down there in April, and it was amazing to me that there were flowers blooming and the weather was great, and I had never been below Washington D.C. in my life before I came there, and I was indeed the first out-of-state Morehead Fellow in medicine in 1972. And I would tell you that while I know it's been transformative, I mean, on the scholar level, don't ignore the fact of how transformative it is for people that went through medicine. And I went through medical school, and when I tell people about this, even to this day, the notion that we were paid tuition fees and a stipend to go to medical school, and now medical students are, having $150,000 of debt to go to school was appreciative and transformative. I got my taste of the South in Chapel Hill, but I've been in Atlanta for the last 40 years as a pediatric neurologist, and I don't think I would have been able to start and continue a private practice as easily as I did if I had all that debt. And I'm being honest with you, and I am eternally grateful, and it was a really transformative experience for me. My wife we got married, she went to law school at UNC. Miss Perry was like a mother there when I would come in to pick my checks up, because I didn't know anyone else in that when I came there, and there was a nice home to just be comforted and reassured. I've had the opportunity over the years to have students shadow me in my practice, to provide jobs, and to participate in the reading of applications over time, and just feel, of all the institutions I've been part of, this is the tender heart that I have for the Morehead Foundation, what it did for my life, and I know I speak for the fellows that were there, and the dinners and things like that. But that's a very important part of the history too, that I think ought to be noted as well.
Thank you, Dr. Shub. And I agree. I did take out some slides about the graduate level part of the program to try to trim. They are in the one that I'm sharing with everyone afterwards. So I hope you'll look through those. You are so right. That program was being phased out just as I came in, and I think it is a shame. It did add so much sort of life to the program. And I'm so glad to hear your words, especially about Ms. Perry and about your appreciation for the program. So thank you so much. Next up, another medical fellow, Mark Smith.
So Dr. Shub beat me to it. I was also a medical fellow. I was actually the first Black medical fellow in 1979 and graduated in 83. I had gone to undergraduate school at Harvard and I was trying to decide where to go to medical school. I had never heard of the Morehead Foundation. And I got this letter one day saying I was going to be flown to Chapel Hill and put up at the Carolina Inn and interview for this damn thing I'd never heard of. And it changed my life. I had two rabbis who were at Harvard Medical School who had been on the faculty at Carolina who said, if you want to be a primary care physician, which is what I wanted to be, they said, you'll actually get a better education in Chapel Hill than you will at Harvard, which was absolutely true. And I'm not smart enough to be a pediatric neurologist by any means, but I decided I want to be a general internist, and I went on to intern at San Francisco General in 1983, the beginning of what we now call the AIDS epidemic. And my whole career, like that of Dr. Shub, has been influenced in part by the fact that I got a great education in the AHEC program at Carolina, and I wasn't weighed down with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. And so I too am sad at the passing of the fellowship program, but it was an important element of my career and life ever since. So kudos to you for that.
Wonderful. Thank you to both of you for sharing about that part of the program. Next up, James Barnes, class of 77.
Sure, I'll be very brief and just say what a great family the Moreheads have been. And coming from England a very long time ago, and having not studied a whole lot of history, I think one of the more amusing parts of my history with the program was after interviewing in London, we had to take the SATs. There was a requirement for University of North Carolina. And this was the very first multiple choice test I had ever taken. We'd never seen one before. And my preparation was to go to a pub and drink a few pints of beer, which I think probably helped my score dramatically. But experience in this country has been fabulous, and the program's just been a great family. And I think, you know, the future is actually very bright, and we can continue to be even more of a family with these initiatives that you're pulling together to talk about our history. So important. Just reading a book about my high school, which was founded in 1558, which was built on a monastery that was in the 1100s and an abbey that was in the 600s. There's a Viking king buried in the crypt of the church at my high school. So I suddenly become more aware of history since I got into my late 60s, and I'm starting to read about it. And I think we could all benefit from learning a little bit more about our own history and the history of our world. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks, James. Danita James is next.
I think I may have just realized this, but I may be in a cohort of one, or maybe there are others I don't know about, but I used my Morehead scholarship both in undergrad and as a graduate student because I graduated in 3.5 semesters and went on to work in newspapers. And when I decided to come back to law school at UNC, I let folks at the foundation know, and they gave me my last semester stipend check at then current rates. I will say that the class of 81 was as much like Tim's class, much more like Tim's class than the later years. And one of the things that I appreciate most about being part of the alumni group is, I mean, I'm jealous of the connectivity, the relationships that the current and you know, digital age scholars have, but in some ways I get to glom onto that as an alumni, and I appreciate that.
Awesome. Yeah. Wonderful. Great stories, everybody. This is just tremendous fun. I don't see any other hands up at the moment. Anybody want to chime in, or are you? Doing fine. I see Sandy Shaw's hand up.
Okay, well, I'll have two things to say. First, I'll tell Tim Burnett, I was in class of 66, and I'm not sure what happened, but 4 years later, there was much more awareness of who other Morehead scholars were. And I don't know how that happened. And the other thing I'll say is, and I actually have a proposal. One of the most magical moments of my time in Chapel Hill, maybe ever, was at the dining, at the dinner in the Dome Chapel, and suddenly realizing that those noises I'm hearing is eavesdropping on a conversation on the other side of the room. And my suggestion is at the next forum, please organize some sort of function there so we can enjoy that again.
That is quite a feature of that room. You hear it right in your own ears, you know, as if it's being said inside your head. So yeah, and it can be quite amusing. Good idea. All right. Well, fabulous, fabulous stories. And we appreciate all of them so much. I tell you, just bringing back good memories for me. And I tell you what we'll do, as I said, if you go back to the actual page on the MC Network where you can RSVP. Oh, Tom, you have your hand raised? Did you? It's cool. If you want to say something, I'm going to finish my point here, and then I'll come back to you for your story. If you go to the page where the event, where you RSVP'd for the event on the MC Network, there is a PDF attachment. You look at the body of the page. If you look down on the right-hand column, there's a PDF there that you can look at all the different slides. And Dr. Shub, you can see about the graduate program there as well. Tom Morris, it wouldn't be a Morehead-Cain event if we didn't hear at least a peep out of you.
Thank you, Megan. I mean, I just wanted to thank everybody who's spoken tonight, because to give us a deeper sense of our roots and of the incredible enterprise of which we're all a small part is just an amazing experience for me, because, you know, I'm class of 74, so I've been involved in this for a long time, but not as long as some of you. And to hear some of the older cousins' experiences, and especially too the younger cousins' experiences. You know, I did everything in a spiral notebook, and to hear about the first laptops being brought in and at first installed on desks and not taken to classes and all that, it's just an amazing sense of continuity over time. But especially the point I really wanted to make was this. When I got to Chapel Hill as a kid who grew up in a 800 square foot house on a street where nobody went to college, and got my letter, I'd been nominated for a Morehead, and we had to call around and find out what's that. And we found out, well, that's something pretty great. We got to campus really, truly, as Tim and others were saying, not knowing each other, not knowing the community we were going to be a part of. We had the dinner, we picked up our checks, we saw the impressive building. I had a suite mate who was a Morehead at the time, and he was a really impressive guy. And so I thought, well, you know, they must have made a real mistake with me, but these are pretty amazing people. But to see it grow from a private, individualistic scholarship effort to lift up individuals, and with the hope of lifting up their communities in years to come, from that becoming a community in and of itself, like it has over the years, and to see that community develop and thrive, where I'm in touch with some of the people on this screen on a regular basis. I mean, you know, there's James Dean, you know, producing one of my favorite TV shows, All Creatures Great and Small. And I've always been one of the small ones, but I feel great knowing James. Just to know you all and to solve problems with some of you on a daily basis, I, as a philosopher, have a sense of power in the world not many philosophers have had in their own time, by the leverage you all give me and each other. So to thank you for the sense of community that you participate in and make robust, I just had to say something, because this is the most incredible group of people. And that's one of our primary recruitment features moving forward as we seek to cultivate leaders who partner with each other across disciplines and geography and time in a way I've never seen before. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much for that. And I see James has his hand up as well. James Dean.
Thank you, Tom. We have actually been connecting over my new TV show, which is a delight, and I'm very excited for you to watch it. I thought I'd just chip in, since we are talking about the history, and James Barnes was talking about the British program, but I remembered now the experience of many of the Brits who joined the program, where most of us had never been to America or North Carolina when we were put up for the scholarship. And the process was very interesting. I'm class of '89. And in the mid '80s, and this process had been going on for a while, where the trustees came over to London and rented like a floor of the Savoy or the Ritz or the Hyde Park Hotel, these very grand hotels, often bringing their wives and so on. And it was such a different time. And they would interview us as candidates. And we would all, on the first day, we'd sort of done a little bit of research and read the brochure and all that. But, you know, most of us were thinking, well, we'll try this out, but we'll probably end up at, a university here in the end. And by the end of that first day, there was a big banquet in the evening, and all of the alumni and all the headmasters of the schools were invited to this banquet. And we'd never really seen anything like it. And at that moment, like, we wanted this scholarship more than life itself, like 12 hours had changed everything. And there was this extraordinary process where at the end of the dinner, all the candidates, let's say there were probably 24 of us maybe, we were given a letter at the end of the dinner to tell us whether we had made the cut and were invited back the next day. And so you had this wonderful feast, this, the generosity of the foundation was already kind of blowing our minds. And then you were invited to that whether you had made the cut or not. And so I've never been able to square whether this was like a torturous thing or a wonderful thing. But it was an extraordinary thing to do. And and then the next day, those of us lucky enough, obviously, to make it back, had a second interview, and then the field was halved to what were 5 scholars were accepted back in the mid '80s from Britain. And then James Barnes, who spoke just before, has stayed, I think, his whole life in the US. I had a couple of years in the US and then have had my career back in the UK. And I think the British program's kind of divided pretty much 50-50 between people who stayed and people who came back to the UK or have found themselves elsewhere in the world. But yeah, the emotional terrain of those 2 days were really something. But I think all of us have kind of ended up with what I call with the scholars, because I'm still involved in the program, a divided soul. Like, we all started with a British soul, let's say, and then by the time we had been through this program, wherever you ended up, you had this kind of British American soul, this transatlantic quality that you really never shake off. But yeah, that the memory of the interviews back in London is something I will never forget.
Thanks, James. And James very modestly says, I'm still involved with James. James has basically been running the Morehead-Cain selection program in Great Britain as chair and vice chair and every possible iteration. But thank you very much for all you do to keep that program going so beautifully. James Barnes, did you have something else to say? I think you had unmuted for a moment. Or
well, only just to add to what James Dean said. So you talked about, yeah, divided soul. So I like the quote of two nations divided by a common language. And many of you have heard this story, but the first purchase I made in Chapel Hill was down at the A&P store, and I brought my new dollars to buy my bread and butter and cheese and paid my money at the cash register. And on the way to the door to go eat it, the lady behind the cash register said, "You'll come back now." So I turned around and went back to the cash register. And she looked at me like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Well, you asked me to come back." So this was one of the early surprises for me about the fact that in the United States, of course, we speak a different language, which I believe each one of us does, but wonderful experience. Thank you.
That's great. And James, in the western part of North Carolina, when someone is leaving from a visit at someone's home, they say, "Will y'all come with us?" And you think, well, am I really supposed to go with you, or are you just saying that? So even across the US, there's a divided language. So, any other thoughts or comments from our wonderful crew? Gosh. Jim Light has a comment to make. Are you muted? I'm trying to see. There you are.
Can you hear me?
Gotcha. You sound great. Thanks, Jim.
This is two little Uncle Mott vignettes. I was in the graduating class of 1965. I was the president of the SAE House, and I think it was in the fall of our senior year. Realizing Uncle Mott was in town somehow through Roy, I got an invitation to him, and he came over for lunch. So he came in the main door. You go down some steps, kind of make a turn down to the lower level, a basement, so to speak, where we would eat. And we were concerned that the carpet was in such bad shape that he might trip and fall. So after a delightful lunch and all that, a week or so later, he sends us a check to recarpet the entire house. And anyway, that's how I met him. And then I won this Corning Traveling Fellowship and wrote him a note and said, "I'm going to be in New York. Come say hello." So there he was. I think he was around 90, early 90s. He was go to work every day dressed in his little stiff collar and tie, but he was a gracious host at that age. He was just unbelievable with his positive energy. By the way, I wanted to thank the Morehead for all of the outreach to the alums. I was sort of distant. I live near Aspen, and a few years ago, Dave calls me up and said, "I'm going to be in Colorado. Let's get together." And I said, "No, I'm not a prospect for a big contribution here. I'm in the real estate business." And whatever was going on that year, he said, no, let's just meet. So that started a whole new connection or reconnection with me and the activities. And I've really enjoyed Kim and the others and Dave, and getting to know your representatives and reconnecting, including a nice event that we co-hosted with the Hydes out here a few summers ago. So I really appreciate the outreach and the connection.
Thank you, Jim. And so true. And thank you for co-hosting that. It was a delightful event that I actually got to come out to as well. And Kim and David, yeah, thank you for your great outreach. Mary, did you have a comment?
Hi, everybody. I have really enjoyed hearing everyone's stories, and especially from some of you all who were fellows. I remember a number of you all in graduate school when I was in Chapel Hill, and just a slightly different perspective on the history of the program. I was in the class of 1979, so the first class that accepted women into the program. There were 12 of us, and we were dubbed the Dirty Dozen. And that didn't bother us a bit. It was just something that we could enjoy, because we were so thankful to be at Chapel Hill with the Morehead program at that point in time. A number of the women in our class were together for a 40th reunion in Chapel Hill a couple of years ago and enjoyed having some time with the students in the group who were gathered for a Morehead event one afternoon. And we were asked if it was difficult to be part of that first class of women. And I think unanimously we felt like, no, the foundation just reacted so beautifully. Our impression was that they had done this for a long time. Of course, we were the guinea pigs of that first class, but the foundation just did a remarkable job of taking care of us, but not really treating us differently than any of the male scholars, we felt. It was an interesting time on campus because this was big news. And there were lots of national magazine reporters that would try to track us down on campus and hound us into interviews. None of us were really interested in making particular points for them, but we were just so grateful that the foundation made it easy for us to be there and just assimilated us into part of a wonderful program. I think the bigger challenge for most of us was not adapting to being women in a previously all-male program with the Morehead Foundation, but it was having been prepared for some wonderful careers at Chapel Hill and then being some of the women on the front edge for moving into those careers that had been male dominated at that point. So thank you to the foundation for another job so well done. I can particularly, this is just a small sort of social aside, but I can remember being part of the summer programs. They had just begun at the time that the women had joined the program, and one of my good friends and Morehead buddies, Joan Templeton Perry, and I were part of the internship at the police department in Rochester, New York. And we arrived in May. We had seen these pictures of this beautiful apartment complex that had been arranged for us to stay in through the police department. We were so excited going up as sophomores, coming from dorm rooms, to think we were going to be in an apartment. And the manager took us down the street. We passed by this beautiful place and he took us into this horrific Smurf blue, old ancient apartment building. And he tried to convince us for 5 and 10 minutes that this was a very, very safe place for us to be. Well, we could tell we were not safe at all. So we stayed away as much as we could that whole weekend until we could get in touch with the police department. And when they picked us up that Monday morning, the officer was so furious. We had never heard language like that before. He whisked us away from there and arranged for us to stay at the University of Rochester. No explanation given until a couple of weeks later. We were riding the graveyard shift with one of the police officers, and he rode by the apartment where we had been placed and explained to us that that had been the site. The very apartment we were in was the site of the longest operating call girl operation in the history of the Rochester Police Department. So that explained the reaction of the initial officer. But the foundation handled the change in location for us so easily. They told us just to do whatever we needed to do just to protect our safety. And I'm sure this was a really big deal for this being the first group of women that they were sending out back in the days. There were definitely different ways of looking at the safety of women, I think, at that point. So again, thank you to the foundation for a job so well done, and for just making things possible for this group of women and those that followed that had not been possible before. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mary, for that wonderful story from our first class of women. Oh my goodness, not wonderful, some of it, but yeah, a wonderful memory. Yeah. Well, I'm looking around for any hands and don't see any. I don't want to have another false ending, but I do want to be mindful. It's dinner time for some. It's well past bedtime for others who are calling in from the UK. So I do want to thank you all for being part of our shared history, and for your willingness to add your stories to the Morehead-Cain anthology. We especially thank Tim and Rachel and Namel for launching us off so well for the whole week of our events. We're thrilled. And Chris, I'd love for you to send us off with some closing remarks, if you will.
Well, thank you so much, Megan. And I just want to add my thanks to all of the wonderful stories I've heard this evening. I mean, as the new kid on the block, this has added so much more color to my overall understanding of this place and the great work that we do together at the foundation. And I'm so proud to be a member of this community and to share Morehead-Cain with all of you. Tom Morris talked about cultivating leaders across disciplines, geography, and time. I wrote that down in my notebook when he said it. I think it's a fantastic statement of aspiration, and it's something that we all look forward to carrying forward for many years to come. I hope you'll continue to join us for other mini forum events. The next one tomorrow is one that I get to host. It is at 4 p.m. Eastern time. It's a panel discussion with 3 of our own Morehead-Cain alumni who built extraordinary careers in higher education. And it's a discussion entitled Morehead-Cain and the Post-Pandemic University. I know it will be lively and informative and fun. And for those of you who are interested in the future of higher education coming out of this fascinating moment in human history, I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you all and have a wonderful night.